Welcome back to A Bit of Curiosity. As usual, I'm your host, Jeremy Howlett. Today I'm joined by Roberto Gutierrez, and his resume is pretty fantastic. So let's just dive into it. We can talk about a lot of this stuff. But Roberto grew up a farm kid in Colorado. Then he went on to get his PhD in communicative disorders from SDSU UCSD, and now lives in Salt Lake City. After leaving academia, he co founded Oru Kayak and helped launch brands like the Van Smith and Sheffield watches. These days, he is a fractional CMO and general manager, helping brands grow and keeping the ones he started going strong. He also owns a parking lot maintenance franchise here in Salt Lake City to mix things up and build some passive income. Outside of work, he's all about rock climbing, mountain biking, paragliding, scuba diving, pretty much anything that gets it outdoors. Best compliment he's ever gotten, someone called him an outside dog. So maybe we'll just start there. Go on that one for a little bit.
Man,
Outside dog.
yeah,
What
that
is
was well. So my cousin's wife was mountain biking in Breckenridge, and she got off trail and that she got lost, and so we were getting these like kind of SOS text messages and calls, and I at the time was driving back from Boulder to Salt Lake City, and my cousin calls me. He's like, "Hey, my wife or my girlfriend's lost, like in the mountains. She's like can't figure her way out, and her and her friend are out there. They're like apparently they're on like cliff sides and they're stuck in the middle of the brush." And he's like, "Could you go help find her? I've called police and everything, and they're like starting to search." And I was like, "Yeah, sure. When was her last location? Can she describe it visually?" He's like, "This is all I have." His brother was in the room, and he's like, "Well, what if Berto gets lost too?" And my cousin just goes, "Nah, he'll be fine. He's an outside dog." I was like, "It's pretty good." We had found her pretty quickly. It wasn't wildly crazy, but she was she was out there, and she's pretty beat up by the brush, but it was all good.
Well, what a fun story to kind of tie to that compliment. There you go.
She was in Breck for a bachelorette party, so her and her friend who had been riding, the rest had gone out for mimosas and massages, and like we're gonna go for this ride. And so they show up, they're bloody and tattered, their clothes are ripped, there's scratches everywhere, and so there's six of them, and I like walk them, they're like frazzled. I walk them in, and it's like, eight girls, and two of them are just destroyed, and they're like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" It was interesting. It was fun though.
No, that's hilarious. What a way to spend a bachelorette party. So
Yeah,
that's my kind of party. The outdoors. Let's go, right? Let's get out.
exactly.
Let's get up
Yeah.
on the mountains and bike. So I'm really curious. Kind of walk us through this. What took you from a pursuit of psychology to becoming an outdoor brand founder? Like that's a bit of a
Yeah.
shift.
Yeah, I mean, it was so in graduate school, I was putting myself through school as a guide, climbing. I was helping run the outdoor program at San Diego State, and then became, a bit of a guide through that, like paddling and kayaking. So canoe, kayak, and rock climbing. Then climbing was certainly the passion for me at the time. It was the thing that I was most happy and excited and enthusiastic about. Trained like a maniac, constantly living in the dirt for that. But I was probably the most proficient at kayaking, and I ended up getting some sponsorship and coaching, and I basically put myself through graduate school paddling and guiding. And so after that, I was wrapping up school. So I had the point of that is I had some background in it, and then I was wrapping up school. I was pretty disenchanted with the outdoor or with the academic space, and some other friends had done startups, and I kind of seen them do that. Some of my roommates in graduate school, they were some awesome folks. I was lucky to be around them. They were they led the search for the tomb of Genghis Khan. They were voted National Geographic Explorers of the Year. And so I was kind of inspired by them to go and do my own thing a little bit. And as soon as I could, I jumped on a plane. I've got a fellowship and was working in data science and sleeping on couches, and then bumped into two guys launching this kayak brand. And I said, "Hey, you guys are awesome. I'm awesome. Let's be more awesome." I mean, that boils it down, but something like that. One guy's he's got an MBA in design strategy. The other's an architect. Neither had any kayaking experience, and so they were looking for that expertise. I brought the willingness to try it, some expertise at the table, networking, things like that. But started with product testing, understanding just terminology, right? Like, oh, this is a hard chine boat and it's going to perform X, Y, Z. And they were like, I don't know what that means. Like, well, you designed it. So yeah, it was things like that, and that's kind of how I got into it. Was on God. I remember thinking my first paycheck was huge at the time, but looking back, I have no idea how I survived in San Francisco on that. Like it was pennies, uh, and so yeah, I did that, and then that's how I kind of got into it. And from there, I basically caught the bug and fell in love with building brand. And the team building aspects, the product development, all that. Just sort of, I mean, you've been down that road. It's just so exciting to see something come to fruition, or just even to just see it exist, or the first time you see one in the wild, you're like, no way,
Yeah,
things
for
like
sure.
that. So
No, and it's fascinating how life kind of takes these turns, right? Like we pursue something, we think we know, okay, this is the direction I feel like I'm called to go, I'm meant to go, and then all of a sudden life says, no, actually you got to do this 180-degree turn and you got to go do this other thing. So, no, that's fascinating. So, any regrets passing up the psychology stuff or
no, I had so basically my decision was live on couches and would couch surf in Sunnyvale at the time to try and find fellowships and jobs, or I had a postdoc at Eastern Carolina University. So I would either move to the Carolinas and I don't know, got a dog and a house or something, or couch surf in San Francisco or Bay Area, I should say. But yeah, no, I'm stoked, man. Life's too good for me to have regrets, I guess, is the I'm too darn lucky to regret a darn
no,
thing.
that's
So
great. That's how life should be, right? Like even when things don't always go right, still learn from them and don't regret it, right? So, as you pursue each of these businesses, as you kind of go throughout life, what is your biggest motivating factor?
I think it's that zero to nothing or zero to something, sorry. That I really love. Those initial stages of creating the brand and finding its first steps. When you're with a team and you're doing that, you have long, hard nights, you have crazy days, you have ridiculous problems, but the little successes are so exceptional, even when they're really small. I think that's a big motivator is honestly it's the team success and seeing people and yourself included in this, but exceed your expectations and their expectations of what you thought you and they could do, right? Like the sum of the parts is greater than the whole kind of thing. And it's pretty special to see that. And then I don't know. I guess I believed in. I sometimes screw this up, but you can either be good or you can be fast. You can either be good or you can be smart. You can be first or you can be fast. So I can. I'm not like no. So you can be good or bold, first or fast. So if you're really good, you can just do the thing. But if you're bold, you can be first to market, right? And first to market's special. First to market's a thing that nobody else can take from you. And then you can either be first at doing a thing or you can be fast at figuring it out. And I've certainly been more on the like, I can be bold and first than good and fast, right? Those are my skill sets lie in that navigating the unknown, pulling something out of thin air, devising analytics and forecasts on, data you've scraped off of Google searches and so on. And so that's kind of why. But yeah, that's that just kind of leading into the skill set that I certainly discovered a lot of that later. I don't, you did it in the beginning just because it sounded fun and cool and you thought there was something there, but you had no idea what I was actually doing, to be honest. So
Sure. And one thing that I like about your resume and some of the things that you've done, and Oru, as you mentioned, right? Like that's one good example of it, is where you're not coming in necessarily with your idea, but you're seeing somebody with an idea and you're saying, hey, we can take this and we can make it something, right? And I feel like we're kindred spirits in that way a little bit, right? Like, and they're great people that come up with a lot of great ideas, but they don't always know how to execute on those ideas. They don't know how to bring those ideas to fruition. And so it takes somebody like yourself to say, hey, that's a great idea. Let's go blow it up, right? Like, let's make something awesome out of that. And
what? Sorry.
go ahead.
Well, I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but like for me, I feel like the way I boil it down in a generic way is you're amplifying genius, right? You're the loudspeaker for genius because a lot of those folks have this concept, this idea, but they don't know how to present it, talk about it, share it, even produce it some of the times. And you just become that conduit where like they're as bright as the sun. If only somebody could aim the sun. And like that's sort of been the strength, right? I'd love, I mean, I know you told me a little bit about your backstory on at Ultra and everything. Yeah, is that sort of the same kind of,
Yeah,
does that resonate, I
I
guess, at
think
all?
to a degree, I like your aiming the sun concept, right? Like like you think about a magnifying glass, right? Like put ourselves back into 12-year-old Roberto and 12-year-old Jeremy, right? Like with the magnifying glass and maybe a grasshopper or something, right? Like piece of wood, whatever, right? Like
Yep,
and
yep, etching your name, yep.
and so as like yeah, I think that's a great visual to draw, right? Like you've got the sun, this big idea, and it permeates, right? Like in Ultra, right? Like my partners, they had, especially Golden, right? Like he knew what he was bringing, like he knew what he had, he knew what the story, right? Like he could tell it, but to scale it wasn't in his purview, right? Like it was like, let's let another shoe company take this idea, right? Like I don't I don't have any interest in scaling it because I don't there's too many hurdles to jump over. And I think that's like looking at you with the kayak guys, right? Like, okay, they kind of knew what they had, but they didn't really know what they had, right? Like it was like, okay, well, we're not outdoor specialists, right? Like we designed it, but we don't really know what it does exactly. You are telling us things that we didn't even think about, right? Like, and so playing that magnifying glass, and I think like as we look at starting businesses or as we look at just partnerships or any of those things, right? Like there are traits that we ought to look for in partners that we're going into business with or marriage or whatever, right? Like, what are the things that you can help me with that help me take that magnifying glass and become really laser focused, right? Because there's like the sun has a lot of power, it creates a lot of warmth, right? But if I want to use the sun to start a fire, I need to really hone that in, right? With a lot of focus. And a magnifying glass does that. And every relationship, I believe, needs a little bit of a magnifying glass. And
Yeah, I mean that's sort of sticking with the metaphor. You need somebody to be the glass, and somebody needs to be the sun, be the glass, and someone needs to hold the magnifying glass, right? So in a triad, and like, but if you have two people trying to be the magnifying glass, it's pointed incorrectly, someone will get burned, and so or if the sun isn't bright enough, kind of thing. So there's certainly a balance, and I think, like you're saying, in finding those that symbiosis in the relationships is important. I think for me, I think what I've learned out of that is the vulnerability of starting early in the communications about, hey, look, I'm not good at this, and I'm going to need your help with this. That was the from Oru early days before we were, I don't want to say successful, before it was recognized brand really. We went through that early. There was a lot of like, I want your job, you want my job type stuff. And it was like, all right, what do you do? What do I do? Let's take names and all this away, because there's a little ego involved, and man, get everybody tearing each other apart to build each other up that was I think that's why it worked so well in the end. But man, that was to be that triad of hand, magnifying glass, sun. It was certainly some ego checking.
so go into that in a little more detail. When you have to kind of tear down those egos, what does that look like? It's a messy thing, but what does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of new. A lot of it depends on who you work with. You have to understand your audience. But my co-founder Artie, he was a big promoter of this through. He went through an MBA program and other things through his. He's an artist at heart, and he would do a really nice job of you'd set the stage, basically asking the person if they're open to your feedback, right? Saying like, hey Jeremy, really good to meet you today. Before we continue, I'm going to ask like, hey, I've got some really important feedback I'd like to share with you. Some of it may not be positive. Are you open to that? And then you audibly say, yes, I'm open to that. And then you set the stage for it, right? And then you process it, and then you close it off, and you leave it there, but you definitely process it. And so for me, it was setting the stage that I learned from Artie in particular on how to do that. And then it was like, prior to that, I had made a lot of videos and cut stupid edits for this, that, the other thing. We used to host a bandit marathon in San Diego, and we'd cut these silly, silly videos. And I was like, oh, you're really good at this. And then you get to professional level, and I cut a video, and they're like, please do not publish this. This is garbage. This is absolute trash. It's off brand. I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And then they break it down, and they're like, actually, it was really close to right, but this was so wrong, it couldn't be right. And then once you tease those things apart, right, and how you go about it. Anton, the designer and creator, incredible guy, like one of my favorite people on the planet. He's insanely smart, and if he has time to prepare, well, he's gotten significantly better, but early on, especially if he has time to prepare for a conversation or a question, he is incredible. Like you're never going to get a better response. But if you put him on the spot with something, he's either going to be overly candid or he's just going to miss the mark. I remember we did an interview, and it was with like a local news person there, and we'd had a bad week, as one does. And they're like, how's it going at Oro? He's like, not well. Like, no, dude, no, 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 no. So yeah, you learn.
Yep. No, and it's important, right, to understand those elements of each other, right, and to be able to pull those out. Okay, like now we know that, hey, if it's been a bad week, we don't put Anton on camera, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
or we give him just the talking points, right? Like this is what the state of this. But yeah, no, it's an evolution, right? Like growing a brand, growing a business is a constant evolution. So what like do you have a personal vision? Like, do you have something that defines like, hey, this is because you've bounced around with a lot of things, you've got your hands on a lot of stuff currently, but like, do you stay grounded with a personal vision?
I should probably work on that more, honestly. Started to.
I put you on the
It's a
spot
good
on this
question.
one.
No, it's great. It's really good. I think the way I've looked at it, the way I sort of perceive, or the way I process it is, in a personal vision way, is I want to experience things, right? I want to pursue as many possible things and opportunities so that I pursue, right? So that I can pursue something new and experience something new and learn from that, right? Like last year, just pick this from last year, but last year I wanted to learn a new activity and I try and pick up a new activity each year, whether or not it, sticks or not, it's fine. But last year I wanted to learn something completely new out of my world, out of my realm of comfort. And so I went and learned paragliding. So I got my P2 certification, and that was almost a month commitment of like spending time on the hill, getting out there, learning, reading, testing. It's actually an FAA pilot certification. Like you're technically a certified FAA pilot for a wing, like a,
Yeah,
but I didn't know that going in, and so for me, it's to experience those things as much as possible, and I try and do it firsthand. I guess I don't have it boiled down to a sentence. I don't have my statement handy, but for me, I would say it's just try to experience as much of life as possible. Uh, and then the comma, the second half of that sentence is, and then share that with my kids, right? Is the new part. They're only 5, but is my one of my kids, she can't wait to paraglide. She wants to fly so much. She's like, dragons are her favorite, and
well, that's cool.
unicorn, anything that flies, she loves,
Yeah.
right? And then the other kid, her dream in life is to hug a grouper. Every time I go scuba diving, did you hug a grouper? I'm like, oh, I don't think it's legal, sis, but uh, yeah,
That's funny. That's great. When they're 5, the world is everything is magical, right? Like, and they love it, right? Like,
yeah,
and it's that way for probably the next 5 to 7 years, and then it shifts a little bit. But teenagers are fantastic, but it goes so fast. I love my children. I love watching them experience life, right? Like, and I think if you were to just boil down your vision to 2 words, I sounds like experience life, right? Like that's it. Okay, so you try to add a new activity every year. So my garage, I've got mountain bikes, road bikes, skis, golf equipment, climbing gear, backpacking, right? Like it's all in there. But it doesn't all come out very often because there's just so much going on. So as you add new things, like how do you continue to pursue what you've once loved as well as what you're now trying to pursue?
yeah. It's certainly balancing. Paragliding is a great example. I got into it, and of course, there's that novelty of it, and I was flying once or twice a week. And in Utah, it's great. We've got incredible access to paragliding, and there's a great community. You can go out places and get the rundown, and it's a relatively high consequence activity, so nobody's shy with information, right? So that if you're like, hey, it's my first time here, they want to know that, right? So it's a nice place, world in that regard. But then I got busy middle of the summer, and now I haven't flown in like 2 months, right? I was twice a week, and now it's been 2 months. And so, and in the middle of the summer, it went down like every other week because I was 3 days a week on a bike when conditions are good or when Deer Valley opened up. I mean, that's my happy place too. So, but yeah, I just learned, I just feel like it's good if you can find things that complement what you're doing. So like snorkeling, freediving, scuba, that type of stuff is a nice complement to most of the other dirt sports, right? Like mountain biking, climbing, or other, because your rest day is now a scuba day or a snorkel day or whatever. Yeah, tough here in Utah, but yeah, it's good to do that. Like this year, maybe I had taken sailing lessons prior, but I may go back to that this year. We'll see how it
Okay.
goes. But because some friends and I've been talking about sailing out to some somewhat more remote spots to climb and dive. So we'll see.
Fun. Yeah, I think if you can put them together, right, and bundle them up, then yeah, I can that can be doable. So
But
there
a lot of them fall away.
I'm sure there's like I saw a friend from high school the other day, and he's like, "Hey, how are you doing?" And then we messaged back and forth after we ran into each other, and he's like, "Hey, you still fishing a lot?" And I'm like, "Yeah, maybe 2 to 5 times a year." So
Yeah,
where there's times where it was 2 to 3 times a week, right? Like just yeah, finding the time to do all the hobbies is really tricky, right? So, especially as we pour more hobbies onto the fire. So, in your pursuit of experiencing life, what are some of the funnest things or the most exciting or exhilarating things that you've done?
man. So my favorite things, like, it was part of a project at Oru, where we went to Indonesia to two remote zones that were previously being stood up on extractive industries like mining or some things that require deforestation to, to resurface or reshape the land or otherwise, or harvesting rock from these mountains, so limestone or marble mining. And we went there with the intent to help bring a little, well, one, awareness, and then two, some ecotourism to the space. We left kayaks with this family in Prelu, which is East Sumba. They're incredible. They're the ikat weavers, the very very cool fabrics. And then another one in Nasu, I think it was the name of the town in Timor. And that one was, the idea there was to bring a little exposure, educate them on. So the kayaks were so easy to do. It took very little, and we put them in these tiny lakes. So it was just a new experience that they could sort of
Yeah.
promote. And the idea was to help gain, again, awareness that people knew these places existed, and then go out and develop some activities. We put up some first descents. We did some deep water soloing. We kayaked waters that had never had a boat on them, which was really cool. They blessed our kayak with a ceremonial chicken. They cut its head off and like sprayed blood everywhere. It was wild. Um, but those where, I mean, there's a fine balance between that, doing that, for your own ego and all that, and then doing the right thing for a community. But out of that, all of those things aside, what ended up being probably the most impactful from that was, fast forward another company, the Van Smith. We incorporated some of the ECOT fabrics into our van builds.
Cool.
And so you'd get one with your van, or the blankets would come with it. And we purchased, I don't remember the number, but it was like 100 blankets, right? And I think it might have been like 8 grand all in, 10 grand all in, or something like that, which is a lot. And that's more than, we paid market price and all that. But I got a message from the person who we coordinated with, and she's like, "Hey, thank you for that order. Your order alone is supporting our town for 8 months." And I was like, "What?" And so it was this interesting understanding of like, wow, like a little thing could do a big thing, or yeah. So those, like, connecting the adventure with actually doing something worth the darn. If I could do that every day, that'd be what I
Oh, that's awesome. Well, let's figure that out. Like that's great.
do.
No, I love watching like taking and being providing an impact to people like that, right? Like what are the ways that we can impact and truly change lives, right? Like a $10,000 order for some fabric, like yeah, okay, that's a lot ish, but it's not that much, right? Like you look at a van build, right? Like one van build's going for 120 grand, right? Like so you're less than 10% of that total. And that was I assume that was across multiple van builds, right? That you're using that material for, right? So and but to impact that community to where it's 8 months of the whole town's livelihood is phenomenal.
It was
Yeah,
crazy.
that's awesome, right? Like, yeah, to be able to have that type of impact is fantastic. So,
There's
yeah, go ahead.
there's a book called there's a book called Doing Good Better, I believe. I'm gonna forget the author's name, and he talks about things of that nature. Where and one of the interesting things, B Corps are awesome. B Corps are fantastic. They're very scrutinized. They're very monitored. But his commentary is like, if you want to make change, don't support B Corps. Make it so that the factories that are not certified are getting more money, because then they're going to be on radars, and then they have to step up their game. He's like, the B Corps fine. The B Corps got it. They're doing great. And yes, you're supporting a thing that's good, but you're not supporting the thing that could be doing better. And I was like, that. I mean, that's such a tricky road to navigate. I love the
Yeah, it's interesting.
commentary. It's just like, whoa, man, that's tough.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like, it's there. Like, you get over into Asia and some of the manufacturing and stuff, right? Like, it's a very interesting road to walk for sure, and how those practices and how those things take place, right? But no, yeah, I think there's a lot that we could there's a lot more we can do, right? Like we can have such a powerful impact to so many lives by just doing little things, right? Like even one of the things, like I wrote the other, or actually it'll be live by the time this comes out, but a few weeks ago when this goes out, right? I wrote a post just how aware are we, right? Like, and I think like 10 grand to a community is awesome, right? Not all of us are in a place where maybe we can spend 10 grand on an entire community, right? But can we notice the individual and just say hi to the individual, right? Like I share the story. So my daughter and I had the exciting privilege or crazy idea to be in Times Square for New Year's Eve. And so on the way, and we decided to pull an all-nighter. We flew home at 6 a.m. from JFK. So from Times Square, we had to get over, we had to pick up our luggage from a luggage storage place just off Times Square. And then we had to haul that from there to Penn Station, which wasn't too bad. Thankfully, the crowds had thinned out by that point, so it wasn't bad. But we got on the subway in Penn Station and rode it to downtown to transfer trains to head over to JFK, right? And but on each of these trains, there were individuals there that were just trying to stay warm from the cold night, right? Like they don't have a home, homeless individuals, right? Like and we sat across from this guy who had no shoes on and he had wounds on his legs and it just pulls at you, right? It's just like that's an individual, right? Like that's a person. Yeah, he's down and out, he's had some troubles, whatever. I tapped him on the shoulder and I gave him my shoes. And I don't say that to praise myself, right? Like, but it was just an act of just noticing him, right? Like so many of us, we just walk by people without seeing them or intentionally look away or intentionally not sit by that person. But as we capture these moments to where it's like, okay, I can make a change in a whole town's life or an individual's life, right? Like, what can I do, right? Like, what are the means that I have that I can help this person? It might have not been a good idea to hand him $100 bill, right? Like maybe that goes to something else, right? I don't know. I don't know what he's going to do with it. And at the end of the day, maybe it's not my place to judge, but I know what he can do with a pair of shoes, right? Like I don't need another pair of shoes. I got plenty.
Yeah.
Frankly, it made my bag a little bit lighter. It was a little less to take home, right? Like, but but it was just the opportunity for him to feel seen, right? And
Yeah.
do we really take those opportunities, right? Like, and so whether it's halfway across the world and impacting a city or just downtown our local city, right? Or our neighbor next door, right? Like there's so many opportunities to just be seen. I love when I go running, especially in places that aren't like Utah's a fairly friendly place. People are used to you saying hi to them. But when you run around Denver, Colorado, or New York City, or and you start saying hi to
Yeah.
people, they kind of look at you weird.
What do you
But
need?
exactly right. But but I don't care, right? Like because it's at the end of the day, it's like I see you, right? Like you're a person. Like why not say hi, right? Like why not wave? Why not say hello, good morning, right? Good afternoon. And just how much that can impact them and impact lives, right? Um so you share the experience going over to Indonesia. What are some other memorable outdoor adventures and experiences that you've had in all of these pursuits?
Yeah, I mean, was before all of the back in graduate school, I was we had a group of folks in San Diego. We had a goofy name for our little alpine club called Pull Harder. It came from a ridiculous story, but basically, it was a self-selecting group. There was no like application or whatever, but you had to push yourself. You had to push really hard, and that was a place where I really learned a lot about community and community building. And also, there's some life lessons, some hard ones, and some good and some bad. We lost, friends in the mountains and things of that nature, which you're in the space enough that happens, but it's never fun and never gets easier. But some of the best parties I've ever had were in celebration of life of some friends, and so you learn a lot. It was an incredible perspective. Was fortunate. I put in a pretty couple years of rock climbing, free climbing, Half Dome, and Moonlight Buttress, and some pretty pretty fun routes or awesome routes that I was fortunate enough to be fit enough to give a good go at. And so yeah, it was cool. But that one took me all over the country mostly because we were graduate school poor. yeah, lots of I think there's one year I slept in the dirt in J tree more than I did my own bed. And so like those are some memories from those are sort of mushed together, you know. But yeah, like waking up and seeing, or well, later in the evening and then seeing a turtle kind of crawl by, or waking up and your hands being so raw or tired that touching your pillow hurts because it's frozen and things like that. Like those ones are great. And I don't know. I think other adventures. We did an incredible trip to the Cayman Islands a couple years ago. We went out to the Cayman Brac, which is a smaller remote island. Brac means cliff face, I guess it refers to that. And the back side of it, the side facing Cuba, is a 200-foot wall that drops to the ocean and is full of routes. We were we have met a couple of the locals and route developers. We're like, how many climbers do you think are on the island right now? He's like, one, two, three, six. And that was really cool. Like, I think it was the reason that one was special. It was very much so a vacation, but it was just this, like the boys and I had never really gotten to a place in our lives where we had ever been able to do something like that. Always been grinding and working. And, so three of my best friends, we headed out there and no expectations. We rented an Airbnb. I mean, wasn't expensive. It was, $50 a night per person. It was awesome. But the snorkeling, the wildlife, the free diving, going into the caves, meeting the locals, like for food or for the route developer locals or whatever it was, that trip was really meaningful. I can't put my finger on exactly why, but I sort of chase the feeling from that week all the
Yeah.
time now. Like when I'm planning adventures, there was this combination of water and climbing and challenge and friendship. So yeah, that's again a very vacation based one, but that was a special trip for sure.
Well, and I think there's something about the like there's two things that you mentioned there, right? Isolation and community. And I think there's a counterbalance between those two, right? Like, and because being out in that area specifically, right, from what you just talked about, right? Like it's not a major tourist destination. It's not thousands of people, right? Like it's not a cruise port, right? Like it's you guys are there and you're the six climbers on the island, right? And but you're entrenched in their community, right? Like you're there, you're part of them and their experience, right? And sharing in that, but in this place where you're just able to intermingle with that, right? I think a lot of times we go on vacation and we go to these destinations that are popular, right? Like great tourist places or go on a cruise, and those can be fun, right? Like, but it's different because you're not living as the locals live. You're not experiencing it as the locals do, right? So, no, that's great. So as you look at some of these experiences, what lessons are you able to pull from these to apply to business, to life, to raising your children?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things for me has been, the thing that has separated a lot of the successful entrepreneurs or people or business people I've ever met isn't necessarily genius or I'm not I say skill or not, but it was the fact that they did it. I know so many people who are far more talented than myself and many other people I've met in the space who would be considered successful, like far more talented, far more intelligent, this, that, the other thing, but they just either are not willing or able to do it. Sometimes it's the ability to do it, right? And I get that, but there's certainly a great deal of privilege to be able to take the risk. But yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is that first step or the taking the step, networking, putting yourself out there, right? But still, if I met you, I mean, I met you what was a month ago or so, and we started talking, and we started getting along. It's great. We're like, dude, what do you think about like doing this, right? Like that right there. You have to say
Yeah.
that. And that's not a like sure that's a skill, like the confidence to or bravado to just come out and say it, but it's not a lot, right? Like almost anybody can say that. So that little thing is great, It's a part of the paragliding thing. A friend of mine goes, "Hey, you want to learn paragliding?" I was like, "Yes, I do." Like the that kind of for the adventure side. And I think it goes back to being of the farming. You don't know what you're going to do, but you got to get it done. That kind of deal. And then that lends itself to things later. But yeah, I think that would be one thing I would certainly say. I think another one just be the resilience, which is the thing I'd love to instill in my kids. I'm not trying to get into anything, but like I was bullied pretty bad growing up, and picked on for this, that, the other thing. And I didn't really come out of my shell until I was about 21. Like I was a very quiet, resigned human. And then 21 came around, and it wasn't drinking. It was just that I was actually living in Ecuador on a study abroad and helping build a zoo in the Amazon, right?
That's
Like it
awesome.
was a very cool
Yeah.
thing. And I just thought it was like, oh, this is what I'm doing. And then people were like, what are you doing? And I was like, yeah, it's neat. And they wanted to hear about it. And like that pulled me out of my shell. But that there was a resilience from having been kind of, I don't know, marginalized is a usable word here, but like picked on a lot, and just showing up every day. And I think so. Those two things, the resilience from, I don't know, getting through that, and then coming out the other side, and then being willing to do it. So
Yeah, I think well, there's a lot of resiliency learned through outdoor adventure for sure, right? Like
yeah,
regardless of what you're doing, right? Like whether you're climbing Half Dome, you're running 50 miles, you're backpacking for days on end, right? Or you're just
totally,
trying to conquer a route, right? Like you got a 5K that you want to knock down, right? Like there's just
totally.
there's a lot of resiliency with that, and we can all learn so much from doing that, right? It's okay, so Ecuador. So that pulled you out of your shell, right? Like why, like how did that trip come about? So this quiet reserved kid
So
ends up
yeah,
in Ecuador doing a yeah,
yeah.
talk to us about that.
Well, yeah, so I mean, I was studying Spanish in undergrad, Spanish and microbiology. Never got the microbiology degree, but was studying Spanish, and wanted to study abroad. It's part of the program that they offer. It's within the school, so it's they make it more accessible, right? I didn't come from the ability to travel a lot, and so the fact that that was on the table, I was like, I want to go far as I possibly can. Most there the options I believe were Spain, or there was a short Central America one, or a year in Ecuador. And I wanted a full year, and so it was basically Spain or Ecuador in this program. And so they were subsidized through the
That's
schools.
awesome.
So I did the Ecuador one, and the first 5.5 months is basically intensive Spanish and language and theory, philosophy, all obviously taught in Spanish. And then the last bit, you design an internship. And at the time, I was microbiology, and so they're like, "Oh, biology. Here are some biology options we have." And one of them was in the it was the it's secondary rainforest, not the primary, but in the town of Tena, there's a zoo, Amazonico, and it was right on this intersection of rivers. And I just interned there, and then taught English at the local school as well, and something else. I can't remember what, but yeah, that was when I was there. The family that I stayed with also ran a small whitewater rafting operation. There, I was first brought to. I helped them out because I could, strong back, weak mind. I could carry stuff, and then they realized, oh, you can translate. And there's a lot of German traffic, a German tourist that came through, and so most Germans speak English, so I could speak Spanish and English and kind of be the translator. So that got me out there 3 days a week on the river, and
Was this your first
here,
foray
there,
to
the other thing.
whitewater? Okay.
Yeah. So I'd never really experienced the outdoor sports. Like prior to this, it was soccer, hunting, off-roading. Like I was very rural Colorado, right? That was my jam. We grew up with farming and ranching, so there's the horses and cattle, sheep, all that. But like beyond that, it was the outdoor world was new to me, and so yeah, I got on the raft and got in a kayak, and the kayaking thing just sort of came pretty naturally. And then once you get hooked, it's over. Like once you find that, and that was sort of the gateway drug for me. Came back to Seattle, was at the University of Washington, took a job at a kayak shop, ended up running that place for a little while later, then a job at a climbing gym, and then graduate school. So, but no, that was a pretty cool that experience was one of those life changing ones where it pulled me out of my shell. The confidence that I had, because for the first time in my life, people were asking me questions, right? We were in the middle of nowhere, and I was the guy who just fixed stuff, right? Because I was a farm boy,
Yeah.
right? It's like, this is perfect, third world country, and I know how to use pliers. Like, let's go, right? Like, I'll get this truck moving, And they were like, well, "What do you?" And so there was this weird that just sort of pulled me out of whatever shell I guess I was in. So it was awesome. Some incredible stories. Did the whole, what is it, the Vision Quest thing and ayahuasca deal back in 2001. It was not my jam, but whatever.
Well, there's so much there's so much growth that happens when we step away from life and we can just go devote a year or 2 years to something different, right? Like a lot of cultures have vision quest or the like becoming their manhood experiences, right? Like
Yeah.
and and that's a yeah, that's not something we tend to do within Western culture, right? And so a lot of
Yeah.
times we go to college and we get lost and confused and don't know exactly what, like, how do I grow up, right? So one of the things that I really like about my faith is within my church, we have a missionary program, and all young men are encouraged to go out on a 2-year mission away from home, right? And actually, I went to Missouri, and my son is out in the Philippines right now, and it's amazing to watch what happens and the growth that takes place, right? Like year, you had to figure out a lot of different things spending a year in South America, right? Like you can't just call mom or walk across the street to the laundromat or right? Like there's a lot of growth and a lot of lessons learned through those experiences that shape us and that define us and put us on different trajectories than we might have thought, right? Like, and I think like you talk about how that opened you up, and I think a lot of it, yeah, okay, it's that you're doing this and people talking to you, but I also think it's just that you did it, right? Like because of that experience, you came out a a more open, more like more mindful person. You were able to go deeper into who you are and kind of discover some things that you enjoyed and gain some new passions, and all of that stuff now steps outside of that year in South America. And now it's like, okay, like I'm pursuing different dreams, different passions, right? Like the
Yeah.
biology degree
Yeah.
kind of the microbiology got put on the back burner and I became an outdoor enthusiast, right? Like it's totally different, right? Like, and some one of my first questions was, how did you go from psychology to founding outdoor brands? And based on our conversation today, I would say that that's a major linchpin, right? That
Yeah.
experience
Oh,
in
yeah.
Ecuador is like that's shaped you. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah. I used to, when I came back from that, I used to tell people, like, if you want to find yourself, go get lost, right? Like,
Absolutely.
all of the, all the pretenses, all of the, like, if you're around the same people, all of the people, my friends before I left, it was all about sports, football, soccer, and that was, or your general activity. And then I realized there's a whole nother realm of sports I didn't know about that like actually called to me,
Yeah.
right? Like, I ironically I break under pressure. I played goalie. I was not great at it, but I played goalie, and I'd break under pressure, high pressure games. I was no good. Turns out you put me in like the highest pressure situations, like people's lives on the line and risking it all. It's like, oh, I'm cool as a cucumber here. This is great. It's so weird. Like, yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, Ecuador definitely was pivotal. Yeah,
Well, and that's the great thing about outdoor sports is you can do it a lot of them by yourself or with one other person, right? And
yeah,
you can do them a long time. Like I can't like I guess I could go find some rec league and play soccer, but it's
yeah.
not
You're gonna blow your knee out in a week, man.
exactly. See, and that's probably why I don't play soccer because my dad blew his knees out a couple times playing soccer at work, and I was like, no, I'm not gonna go that route. I'm okay. So no, that's yeah. And I love how life does that to us, right? Like opens these doors. When we learn to surrender and open things, like it'll show us these different things of where we're essentially called to be, right? And I just finished the book from Michael Singer called The Surrender Experiment. He's probably more known for his book The Untethered Soul, where he talks a lot about the inner voice and stuff, right? But he applied all of that learning to his own life. He was in an economics PhD program, right? And he at the University of Florida, and he essentially kind of walked away from that. And he's like, I'm gonna go live in my van out in the woods of Florida. And that's what he started to do, but he kept getting pulled back to finish his doctorate. And he had come to the point where he's like, okay, I'm just gonna surrender to life. And he ended up becoming a teacher, and then he became kind of he didn't become the monk lost in the woods by himself that he thought he was going to be, because he lost himself and thus he found himself and he ended up building a multi-million-dollar company that sold to WebMD, right? Like it's and but it was because he learned to surrender to what life put in front of him, right? And I think so often we think that we can dictate the things that we have no control over, right? He talks about in the book, he's like, how often do we say, why is it got to rain tonight, right? Like, I was going to do this or that, right? Like, I can't control the weather. I have no control over the weather. So what, am I going to be upset about it? Or do I just say, hey, it's raining. That's nice. And then just go about what I'm going to do. And the more that we learn to just let go of those things that we can't control and control the things that we can control, the more that will come in front of us, the more the universe will reward us, right? God, divinity, whatever that is, right, will reward us for just learning to surrender to it. And I think that's such a cool thing, right? Like you're like, hey, like a year abroad, that sounds awesome. Take me as far and as long as possible. Great. I'll go do it. And what you thought it might have been going into it was not at all what you came out getting, right?
Well, yeah, I mean that stands true with so many things, right? Businesses are a great example of that, where I've got this is the target. You build a target, you have to have a target so you can aim, but then you fire the arrow at the target and it may not hit the bullseye, but hey, you've loosed the arrow, right? And that's the biggest thing, that like without it, you like I don't think you should just launch arrows for no good reason, but like don't you got to loose the arrow to see where it goes, right? It
Absolutely.
may not end up where you thought, but like otherwise it's just stuck in the quiver, right? Yeah, I totally agree on the surrender side of things, but on the expectations, I think it's also that way with life, where who I thought I would be, or what I thought I would do, or what I thought Oru would be, or the Van Smith, or this, the whatever project is going on, right? Like this, yeah, doesn't matter. But what you thought it was going to be and what it ends up being, and you should be proud of that first of all, uh, and proud of what you've accomplished, regardless of whether or not it hits the original target.
Yeah. And
I think that's a
no, absolutely.
the
Take a minute and tell us the watch story, because I
oh
think that
sure,
fits
yeah.
exactly what you're saying, right? Like it's not what you expect, and it turns out to be way different,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So here I have one on right now, actually, funny enough. But yeah, so the Sheffield watches. This is a Chronos, sorry, Chrono. It's a fun little watch. But so the founder, the starter, the guy who started the thing, is a friend of mine, Jay Turkboss. He and I worked together at Nathan Sports, at United Sports Brands, the holding company. He's been the head of product there. He helped innovate the hex technology. So if you see like Steph Curry with hexagons on his elbow, that's Jay's stuff. He started that in Minnesota. The world's most popular mouth guard. He's engineered and created that. So he's a product guy, and he loved watches, loved diving, loved cars, and so he wanted his favorite watch ever was Sheffield watch. It was his first watch his parents ever gave him, his first dive watch, and he got it. I believe it was in 1973 for $11 or $13. And then the business dies, goes out of business, and he wants to relaunch it. And he reaches out to me. He's like, "Hey, would you be willing to help me do this?" I was like, "Yeah, of course, man." Just sat down over coffee, and I was like, "Whatever you need." And I helped him with, I happened to, you know a few people. It's like, "Hey, let me help you with your founding docs. Let's get some, organizational structure here. Let's do some of this. Let's get your website stood up." Found a newspaper clipping that had the logo on it. We revived the logo from a newspaper clipping from the 60s, or sorry, from the 70s, and like all these little things that are like, whatever, this is a fun little project. And yeah, we got it going. First watch launches. He's on a podcast. He's talking about it, and it's a Portion watch podcast. And he sets the watch down, gives it to the guy. The next guest that comes on is Jerry Seinfeld. And he's like, "Hey, where'd you get that watch? That was my first dive watch as a kid." And then they spend most of the show talking about the watch. And ever since like that, right after that, we literally couldn't make watches fast enough. And it was unreal. I mean, it's still a hobby project for the both of us, but he was just like, "I kind of want to bring this back to life." And the fact that whatever was coffee or a beer or conversation, and we did it, like it's now a thing. There's going to be another watch coming out with a late night show host who likes cars in the next few months, just because this all happened. It's like crazy. And again, it's just this didn't had no idea, right? I was like, "Oh, whatever. He's a good guy. I'll help him out." And now he and I are like working on other projects and trying to bring another product to market. It's awesome. So yeah, just do it, man. Like I could have said no, I'm busy, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of fun to see how those dominoes fall, right? Like you guys had no intention to have Jerry Seinfeld talk about the brand, right? Like that you couldn't plan that, right? Like unless you had hundreds of thousands of dollars to go in front of Jerry and say, "Hey, can
Totally.
you pitch this for us?" Right? Like, but the free advertisement that you guys got just on a whim because of the where you were, right? Like you surrendered, right? You said, okay, let's do this. Let's go build this company. Oh, yeah, let's get on this podcast, right? Like, no idea that Jerry's going to be the next guest. He's going to
Right.
spend that
Totally.
time, right? Like, and then it continues to snowball from there, right? Like, and those are things that we can't plan, right? They just happen. We can, that you're there, right? Like, you're doing it, you're putting in the work. And even if today you guys were selling a couple watches a day and just kind of piddling along, like, okay, like it's still a thing, right? Like it's a cool hobby, right? Like here we go. But instead, right, like you get these couple of big wins that you don't plan for, you don't prepare for, and they just take off.
Yeah. Well, I like to like so luck is something I think a lot about. Say I'm like the luckiest guy alive. I think that, a lot of people would say I think people look at luck as a passive thing. I don't believe that. I believe luck is an active thing. I think to be lucky, you have to be aware, willing, and able. So for the kayak thing probably the best example. Well, the watching works too, but I was, I was aware that this existed. Like it came across my table. I had my eyes open. It wasn't by accident that I stumbled across these guys. I was sleeping on couches, right, bouncing around. I was willing, right? I was like, hey, I'll give it a shot, and like I'll try it. I had no idea, and I remember at the time when I decided to do it, I was like, I'm betting on myself. If I ever let myself down, when I truly commit to doing this, and at the time I was an academic, and it's like it's pushing pencils and crunching numbers, but I was no, when I commit, I do it, right? And then the third thing was able, like I had put in a decade of experience paddling. Right, I had been boating for a while. It was my profession for a minute. So the combination of aware, willing, and able allowed me to be super lucky and co-found Oru
Yeah.
Kayak. Right, like so. I think luck gets thrown around as a almost a slight sometimes, but I love luck. It's a good thing, and I think it's an active thing as well. So
Yeah, it's not the same thing as going and buying a couple of scratchers or putting into the Pennsylvania lottery,
yeah, it's
right? Like
fortunate,
it's luck in business is exactly what you pointed out, right? Like
man.
so it is luck is made. It's not just it because if I'm not aware, if I'm not willing, if I'm not able, right? Like I'm not gonna be lucky. It's not gonna happen, right? Like I'm not gonna like yeah, it's not gonna fall in my lap because I'm not gonna be in the right places when I need it to, right? And that opportunity
Yeah.
to.
Oh, the you see it. It's you see the like it must be nice commentary, like, oh, it must be nice, it's like I wish I could tell you everything that went into it must be nice. Like I wish you could rewind the last 12 years with me and go through the paying for gas out of the coin thing in my car just so I could make it to work to get a payday
Yeah.
the next day, and like do the same thing over again, and like barely sniff by here and there. Like again, I'm not trying to say that I was like suffering, like your guy on the subway. I'm not comparing those two, but to say that it was just like must be nice, I always take that on the chin a little.
No, I agree, right? Like it takes a lot of work and a lot of determination. I'm reading The Compound Effect right now by Darren Hardy. I don't know if you've read that one, but he intros it really with the penny concept, right? Says, okay, if I was to walk in and I pitched this to my 12-year-old the other day, and I was proud with her response, right? Like said, okay, honey, if I've got door number one and door number two. Behind door number one's $3 million. And her eyes light up. She was like, okay, like well, I'm interested. And then I said, behind door number two is a penny that doubles every day for 31 days. I was I don't know. I kind of expected her to say $3 million, Dad. That's way better than a penny, right? But she started to do the math. She's like, okay, like, and then she just asked Alexa. She's like, Alexa, what's a penny doubled every day for 31 days? And I think she said 30 days. I think Alexa gave her the results for 30 days, but it was $5.3 million, right? On the 30th day. And she's like, oh, I'm taking the penny, Dad. Like, no problem, right? But on the 31st day, it's 10.7 million dollars, right? Like that's more than 3x your 3 million. But on day 12, your penny's worth like $2. And even on day like 25, it's still only worth like a few $1,000s. But it's that compound effect, right? Like and And I think that's exactly what we're talking about, right? Like as we pursue something, right? Whether it's experience life, whether it's building this business, whatever it is, right? Sometimes things are really, really hard, but if we're doing the right things, then there's that moment where it just hits that hockey stick, right? And it just takes off. And then it's, wouldn't it be nice, right? Like, well, okay, yeah, it is nice these last 2 years, but you didn't see the 10 years that was really seemed flatlined until those 2 years, right? So I think, yeah, there's a lot of power in that. So if someone listening were interested in starting a product brand, what advice would you give them, Roberto?
I think one of the I remember we were being interviewed one time, and oh, what was it? And somebody asked Anton, and he very abruptly answered. But what's the most important thing for launching a product company? He was like, a good invention. And they laughed, and because they wanted, like, oh, brand marketing, finding the right co-founders, but at the core of it is the product. Like, I think that's a big thing. You can sell fluff, like, it's doable, it's totally, absolutely a thing you can do and sell, or you can build a brand that's wicked strong and is incredible. I mean, Liquid Death is a great example. I'm not slighting their water, it's great, it's amazing, but they're selling water, right? They're selling sparkling water that's not wildly novel, right? And only some of them are flavored. Some of it's just sparkling
Yeah.
water, right? But they build an incredible brand, and they're huge. And I know that you can do that. From where I sit, though, I recommend the product being a core, something that's truly core to what you do, and helps you define. And then from there, building your mission and vision, keeping an eye on them, and trying to stay true to those. As I mentioned before, your target may move, but I think those are the two biggest things. And understanding if a product is good or not is truly an art form. You have to get it out there. You have to do the right things. Many great products never make it to market. Many bad products are all over the place. So,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
for me, it's, yeah, trying to understand the product. And it doesn't have to be like, Oru was revolutionary in that it took a major problem, which is the size of a kayak, and fixed it. But it doesn't have to be that revolutionary. It can be story based as well, right? Like, there can be other things, like, I guess Tom's might be an interesting example of that, where the shoe is not revolutionary, but what they did was.
Yeah.
And so they built their product was the whole thing. It wasn't just that canvas shoe. So for me, it's the product at the core, and then you can hang your hat on that. But yeah, that'd be my first bit of advice. That'd be the first one I would say.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Like you bring up the water, right? Like, and just there are so many brands out there. You could maybe call it the Apple effect, though Apple makes phenomenal products. But they've leaned so much into this vibe of brand, right? That it's a culture, it's a community, it's like it's a status symbol to some degree, right? But and you look at brands that have come out of that, right? Whether it's Liquid Death, whether it's Red Bull, or Supreme is like the one that I go to the most, right? Like
My gosh, yeah, for
they
sure.
are not a
It's a great
product brand.
example.
Like it is 100% the brand is their product, right? Like their product
Yep,
is
yep,
literally that red oval or
yep,
rectangle, I guess.
yeah,
Like that's all it is, right? Like it's and because their t-shirt, their hoodie, it's no different than going to buy an Under Armour one or a Nike one. Like they didn't reinvent any manufacturing process. They're not using any fancy material. It's at the end of the day, it's just the brand, right? And you
yeah,
can do that, right? And obviously there are brands that have done that and done really well, right? But there's also a lot of brands that have attempted that, but have had crappy product and have not gone
yeah,
anywhere and
right,
have died out, right? And struggled. I think Reebok tried to do that for a while, right? Like let's just go
yeah,
by the name, right? And it wasn't until what's his bucket bottom and Shaq got involved that they were started to
Shaq,
make a comeback under a licensing deal and whatever, right? Like
yep,
but
Walmart, yeah.
but it's yeah, a product tends to trump all the time, right? Like
Well, yeah, I mean, part of the other reason I say that, it goes back to, like, it's very egocentric as well when I say it, because as I mentioned earlier, the good, bold, first, fast. For me, I'm better at the being bold and first than I am at good and fast. And so Supreme is good and fast, right? They were good at marketing, and they were pushing hard. They were hired great people. They had incredible exposure. They partnered with these XYZ. That's
and they
fantastic.
have the pockets to do it.
Tricky part, the money. That's exactly it. it is very expensive to do that, right? Like wildly expensive to
Well,
do
it's
that.
Prime,
And
right? Like
so
Prime is a
where
similar example to that, right? Like, yeah,
exactly.
because you look at the Pauls and what they can
Yeah.
do with Prime because of their influencer status, because of the money they have, right? Like, yeah,
But yeah, but I think anybody can be bold and first, right? Like it doesn't cost, launching Prime, they probably spent $20 million launching Prime, right? And they had 20 to burn,
yeah,
right? For them, it was like, oh, well, if it works, it works. If not, whatever. Turns out it's $1 billion thing. Great, good for them. But like, I'm working on a silly project now that like it's nothing crazy, but like whatever it's going to cost $4,000 to get this thing off the ground. If it works, it works. If it grows, it becomes a thing. Great. Of course, not everybody's gonna have 4K, but you can start with something in your basement and noodle, right? Like Anton Oru started with cardboard, right? You cardboard all over the place. Like his first kayaks were cardboard.
it's awesome.
So yeah, like yeah, I don't know, yeah, things like that. So
No, that's good. That I think that's great advice, right? Like focusing on the product, making sure the product is differentiated. Like I always tell young entrepreneurs, make sure you know your USP, right? Your unique selling
yeah,
proposition,
yep,
because you got to know what differentiates you, right? Like, because there's a lot of products, there's a lot of services out in the marketplace, right? Like, I love Ryan Smith's story with Qualtrics because, again, you talk about can you be good and fast or can you be bold and first, right? And they were bold and first, right? They built a survey company that is now used by majority of the Fortune 500 companies, right? And they did it with very little money out of the basement, right? And it was a project that he was working on with his dad when his dad came down with cancer. Like the story is just awesome, right? And what he's built and
awesome,
what
yeah,
he did with it was phenomenal, right? And but it was steady, it was patiently persistent, and it he was probably building it for 6, 7, 8, 9 years before anybody knew who Ryan Smith was. So
yep. I mean, one of my other favorite now they know. One of my other favorites is that it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. Everybody's seen, so what is it? The social media movies, right? And they're like, oh, I want to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. It's like, yeah, that'd be sweet. But you're talking about unicorns here, man. Like, yeah, and for me, sort of the other side I would say is I think it's also okay to have a big piece of it, or sorry, the a big piece of a small pie instead. And everybody always talks about having a small piece of a big pie being the way to go. I'm kind of on the other side of it. Like I'd rather have a big piece of a small pie, right? Like just to you can have 0.0001% of Facebook in shares, and then when it exits, you get a whatever it's called $150,000 when you leave it or whatever. Like that's great, that's really awesome. Or you can have a thing that becomes a $3 million business, which is a small business, and exit, and you make 2.5 on it. Like which of those sounds better,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah, for sure. So yeah, and I think there's a lot of niches that we can go and chase, right? That make it relatively doable to build that $2 to $3 million business, right? So because there's not a lot of businesses that sell for $1 billion. You hear about them all the time, but if you
oh
if
yeah,
you compare the numbers to how many of those versus how many businesses are started, there's not very many.
gosh,
Yeah, and also how much are you being diluted before you actually sell? Right? Bringing in partners, bringing in investors, doing all of those things, right? So there's a lot that goes into it. So you just got to crunch the numbers, understand your unit economics and how that plays, and what the exit strategy is, et cetera, right? Like knowing all of that stuff. So, well, I appreciate it. Let's run through some rapid fire questions here before we close. So you can answer them however you wish, however long you wish, and I'll try to keep my commentary to a minimum. So, Roberto, how do you respond to failure?
if you don't learn from it's only a failure if you don't learn from it. So that's how I kind of approach it. Try again, I guess, is the cool, like learn from it. That's it.
Great. What would you consider your greatest accomplishment?
Wow. I think to date, is probably just being content in life. Finally, like for all of the struggles and whatever you go through, and this, that, the other thing, but finding contentment in being who I am is kind of what I'm pretty most proud of at this point.
I can relate to that. I think that's, yeah, getting to that place. There's a lot of value in that for sure. What frightens you?
lack of time, not enough time to get it all done. I think the clock's ticking faster than we want to think it's ticking.
Time is our most valuable asset for sure.
The old hourglass glued to the table.
Yep. What inspires you?
Yeah, the hourglass glued to the table. Clock's ticking. No, I mean, there's so many things to experience, right? Like I wanna. There's so many wanna dos, to dos, hope to dos, and then in the end of the day, I really hope I can help others accomplish their goals. So probably those the clock ticking, doing things and helping others achieve.
Awesome. What gives you hope for the future?
I mean, the fact that there is one, right? The arc of humanity is long, but trends towards good. Just because you can't see the change you want doesn't mean it's not happening. I guess this maybe slightly shades of political, but people make fun of flat earthers because they say you can't. They're saying you can't see the curve of the earth, and we make fun of them. But when we say change isn't happening fast enough, it's just because it's not. Just because you can't see the change doesn't mean it's not changing.
Yeah,
So,
I like that. I like that concept for sure. What's something you'd want to tell your 18-year-old self?
keep your head up. I was a good kid. Academics were great, but yeah, keep your head up.
What book are you reading right now?
And what is it called? It's a Trinity. It's a graphic novel about the Trinity Project in White Sands. We just visited White Sands with my family's down there. We just visited White Sands, New Mexico, and I picked up that graphic novel, so it's bedside right
Okay.
now.
All right. What book have you read in the past 12 to 18 months that you would highly recommend to others?
What was it? Actually, it was just a fun one. Hail Mary Project. That
Okay.
one from I can't remember. Just a fun
Yeah,
one. But
that's a bestseller. Yeah, that's a top chart. I haven't read it, but yeah, familiar with it. What's your favorite place you've traveled in the past and why?
gosh, now there's a hard one.
It's a hard question for me to answer too, so I don't blame you.
Wow. I would say one of the full experience. So I spent sleeping in bus stops, like dirt bagging it, but spent a week in the Verdon Gorge in France climbing. It was sort of a time of my life thing, and everything hit right. It was exactly what I needed when I needed it, and it was one of those where our trip was awesome. I was so excited to start a new life when I got home. So it was a good one. That was
Cool. Awesome. Um, well, great. Where can people keep up with you if they want to follow you, connect with Roberto?
Yeah, I've got a silly portfolio page, rivergoat.com. It's where I put all my little projects and whatnot. But otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn is probably the other best place. LinkedIn / and then Roberto Santiago
Okay, we'll throw
Gutierrez.
that in the show notes. So awesome. Thanks, Roberto. Well, it was a pleasure. I appreciate the time today. This was fun chat, kind of hearing about all the things you're working on and the adventures that have got you to where you are today. Fantastic.
Yeah, same man. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Everybody, this is a bit of curiosity. Appreciate it. Would love if you share this with somebody. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate you.